right, good morning, everyone. I have the honor, the privilege of being the first speaker, and maybe even a little bit of a curse. So I remember when I was transitioning from being an engineer into a first-time leader, I was super excited. I was like power posing all the time. How many of you are transitioning to being a first-time leader? Go ahead and do a quick power pose in your seats. All right. How many of you are supporting these folks? All right. And how many of you are hoping to become a first-time leader maybe next year? Okay, good. So I was super excited because I would get the opportunity to do things that I didn't get to do as an individual contributor. I would get to pick projects, I would get to lead people through them, and overall I was feeling pretty excited. Then a couple weeks in, reality set in. And I noticed that I was constantly in meetings with my teammates, with stakeholders, with other teams. And when I wasn't in meetings, I was helping out my direct reports, as well as my other teammates, solve problems. And all of this left me kind of feeling like I was being pulled by a number of directions, just the constant context switching. And I really felt unaccomplished at the end of the day, because as an engineer, it was kind of in my DNA to write code, ship product, and have some tangible results at the end of every single day. So I thought about how I could concoct a scheme where I would get to benefit from being a leader as well as an engineer. And I came up with a scheme where I would wake up a couple hours early in the mornings, I would write some code, and then I would go into the office and be present in all of the meetings with my teammates and with others. And then at the end of the day, I would return to writing a couple of hours of code. And all of this was working out pretty well for, a couple weeks. Until again, reality set in, and this time the reality was that I had become a bottleneck. I'd become a bottleneck because I didn't have the time to fix my bugs in the middle of the day, the bugs that I had written from the code that I had written, and people were just like, hey, continuous deployment, continuous integration. I was like, okay, I'll get to them. So instead of giving my code to somebody else on the team and sort of delegating, I became a little bit of a hoarder because I really wanted to feel that sense of accomplishment. And to make matters worse, I got some pretty harsh feedback. And that feedback was I wasn't doing a good job as a leader or as an engineer. And if I was going to stay at this company, I needed to pick one of the two roles and kind of see it through. So I wasn't sure how to proceed, and I decided that the best course of action would be to solicit some help from outside. I reached out to a trusted advisor to ask how I could go about managing myself as a leader, do the things that I was doing well, but also figure out what my blind spots were. So they came in and they shadowed me for a few days, and afterwards they said what I really needed to learn was how to scale myself better as that first-time leader. I was doing too much. I know I'm not alone in this, and I'm sure a number of you have either faced this in the past or hopefully or unfortunately you're dealing with it right now, but what I want to share with you today are some of the things that I did to scale myself as a first-time leader. Hi, I'm Poornima Vijayashanker, and as Mary kindly introduced me, I was previously the founding engineer of Mint.com, the personal finance app, and I helped build a prototype, launch it, and scale it to serving millions of people. After the acquisition, I decided to transition to becoming a founder. I first led BusyBee, which was a CRM solution for small businesses, and then eventually I shut it down to start Femgineer. I transitioned it from being a blog into a business, and today Femgineer is an education company where we help techies like yourselves level up in your careers and build products as well as companies. I've also been an entrepreneur in residence at 500 Startups, a lead mentor at Techstars, and authored 2 books, in case you want to check them out, How to Transform Your Ideas into Software Products, and Present, a Techie's Guide to Public Speaking. I'm also the host of Build, so if you like today's talk and you want to get a little bit more content on product development, leadership, entrepreneurship, I highly recommend you check it out on my YouTube channel, Femgineers. So with that, let's get back to the topic at hand. And one of the things that my advisor, as they sat me down, told me was that I needed to build a self-sufficient team. And as they were telling me this, I was like, why is a self-sufficient team even important? I mean, if I'm the leader, shouldn't I be like the linchpin? Shouldn't people want to like come up to me? I help them solve their problems. I guide them. Like, I need to be really involved, right? And what I realized was that doing that actually wasn't helping anybody because I was, again, becoming a bottleneck. What I really needed to do was first learn how to trust other people in a number of ways. I needed to learn to trust them when it came to making decisions. I needed to learn to trust them to getting things done. And I needed to learn to trust them to spout any knowledge gaps they had or come to me when they were ready to seek some help. The other thing I needed to learn is that a bus factor of 1 doesn't help anybody. In fact, it makes things worse. Nobody can take a vacation. Nobody feels like they're learning from one another. And so these were 2 things that I needed to take stock of. And I realized as I did this, there would be a number of benefits. People could actually go on a vacation and actually take a vacation, not like check their email from the beach. And they could also transfer their knowledge from one person to the other to help each other level up. I personally felt this benefit last year when I went on parental leave and my business could continue without me being there and I could spend time with my little one. So I have some caveats though, because this is my story and some of it may apply to you, some of it might not. And a lot of it is going to depend on your particular company's culture. So if you have a culture where you're expected as a first-time leader to write code, kind of deliver, as well as lead people, that might be a little challenging. I know for me it wasn't prudent. I found that context switching not helpful. But if it's part of your company culture, it might make sense to talk to your manager about how that day-to-day is going to roll up into a team or a company goal. The other is if you're on a remote team, you might find that you need to invest a little more heavily into developing some communication skills or some best practices and a process for development so that you can distribute across your team. So what I'm going to tell you today is certainly not the gospel. These are the things that worked for me in my situation in leading a team of about 5 to 7 people. Initially, everyone was together, and then eventually we became a distributed team. And as I took on the leadership role, I was tasked with 3 goals. The first goal was to scale the product. We were moving from a prototype into a scaled architecture. The second was to scale the product development process. And the third was to scale people issues. And as I sat down with my advisor, I was like, okay, what do I need to do first? And my advisor said, well, you really need to lead by influence and not authority. How many of you have heard this phrase, like lead by influence? Yeah. So maybe some of you know what that means, but I honestly didn't. And I was like, what does that mean? And I gave my advisor the benefit of the doubt, thinking that, okay, it wasn't some like management mantra. Maybe they knew a little thing or two, and certainly they'd been a veteran in the industry. And they told me, well, you need to stop telling people what to do, and you need to learn when it's appropriate to step in to situations and when it's appropriate to not step into situations. And part of that is giving people the what and the why, and then letting them figure out the how. I knew this was going to be a challenge for me. I was a recovering micromanager, and again, a recovering engineer who loved problem solving, who loved firefighting. And I was like, okay, how do I start? So I started very small. And I started small by doing just one thing. I called a meeting, I kind of laid out what we wanted to do, and then I just shut up. I literally sealed my mouth shut. I explained the what and the why, and the what was we needed to scale our architecture from a prototype into this service-oriented architecture. And the why, because we were growing as a company, we had a lot of customers, and we wanted to deliver a positive experience to them. And then I just kept my mouth shut and let my engineering team run. And people started to chime in. One engineer raised their hand and said, so if we're going to move in this direction, I really think it's important that we have a better test suite because our code is really brittle, and on top of that, we have a lot of tech debt, and it's unclear which tech debt we should pay down first. But as we check in more code, it's just going to cause more and more problems. So we're not going to be able to move into that service-oriented architecture. I thought this was brilliant, and I also knew a lot about test-driven development, so I really wanted to speak up. But I kept my mouth shut, and I let them continue to brainstorm. And by the end of the meeting, they had kind of created a scheme for themselves where they would build out the test infrastructure that could then support our transition. And as a result, what I had done is I had delegated all of the work that I had been doing, and I was starting to build a team that was autonomous. They would be responsible for doing all of the research, all of the implementation, and just to add a little bit more to their list, I also let them set their own deadlines. And this was kind of novel, but the reason I did it is because they were on the front lines. And so I figured they would know best whether they had any knowledge gaps, when they experienced scope creep, and I really needed them to get into the habit of doing this, even if they made mistakes, even if their initial estimates were off. Because over time, they would learn how to course correct instead of me imposing some artificial deadline on them. And of course, they turned to me and they're like, well, what are you going to do? You're not going to do anything. And that wasn't necessarily true. I still had a lot of work to do. I needed to check in with them. I needed to coach and mentor people who were new to the company and to fill in any of those knowledge gaps they had, help them level up and coach them. And of course, I needed to review the results to make sure people were on track. I really just served as kind of guardrails for the team. So one question that comes up, and I certainly had this, was does team composition matter when you are doing this kind of transition? Does it matter if you have a junior team versus a senior team? I have to be honest, it actually doesn't matter because junior engineers can level up very quickly if given the right guidance and coaching. And senior engineers can certainly mess things up, thinking they're know-it-alls or not being very communicative. So at the end of the day, the team composition is really about making sure you understand people's knowledge gaps, that you have good communication frameworks in place, and that people have complementary skills. Really what that means is you need to spend about 6 to 12 months getting to know the people on your team so that you can then coach and mentor them. Or sometimes you might have to hire people from the outside to come in if you need more expertise. And I'm happy to report that about 8 weeks into this project, I discovered that my team was functioning pretty well and that my day-to-days were spent helping with those knowledge gaps, helping coach people, and helping them level up. And by the end of the 8 weeks, they felt pretty good. They delivered their initial solution, but there were still some things that came up. They were concerned that this was a great first pass, but what would they do in the future? How would they continue to iterate on the process? So I made one suggestion, which was to have a postmortem every quarter. And what that would look like is everyone would come into a room, kind of air their grievances, and then we would decide as a team to pick 1 to 2 process changes. And the reason I limited it to 1 to 2 is because change of behavior is hard, especially when you're scaling a team and the organization is constantly in flux. The other reason was to make sure that we were headed down the right path, that these process changes were actually making an impact. So about 12 months in, I was feeling good. I had started to scale the product development, I had started to scale the process, and it was time to turn my attention to scaling people issues. And I've been pretty fortunate to be on teams where the people have been fantastic. I've never really had a situation where I couldn't work through it. I have had to fire some people, but in general, overall, people have been pretty competent, and they have been there to help me as I've made transitions. And in particular, when I first transitioned, I had 2 engineers, let's call them Sam and Dakota, who were the best of buds. Maybe there's some people on your team who are like this. They loved getting coffee together, they loved pair programming, and even when they weren't at work, they would go to hackathons on the weekends or just do fun stuff together. So I knew that they were this like dynamic duo. And I was really surprised one day when I walked in and I saw that they were seated on opposite sides of the room, or standing sometimes. I didn't know what was going on. So I thought, you know what, I'll just let them come to me. I'll like set up my machine, I'll get my day started. And soon enough, Sam approached me and asked to go into a conference room. So we took a conference room, and Sam proceeded to explain what had happened. There had been a nasty customer bug, and Sam had come up with a solution, had asked Dakota to code review it, and after Dakota had code reviewed it, sort of dismissed Sam, said that the solution wasn't robust enough, and came up with a different solution, and wanted to deploy the solution. Well, Sam was pretty irate at Dakota's behavior, and told me that I needed to fire Dakota. And I took it under guidance and said, all right, I'm happy to hear your side of the story. Let me go and find out what happened with Dakota. And I said I would get back to Sam. So what do you think happened next? I walked out of the conference room, and of course, Dakota had been watching what happened because we have glass doors and windows. And Dakota asked to speak to me as well. So I took Dakota into another conference room, and Dakota proceeded to unload what had happened. Dakota had said, yes, Sam had asked for a code review, but Dakota noticed that it was not very robust and needed to come up with more corner cases, more conditions, and Dakota just had a really robust solution and wanted to deploy it. And gosh, Sam was being so selfish and self-centered in thinking their solution was best instead of thinking about what was best for the company. Perhaps I should also fire Sam. I was like, okay, this is gonna be a fun day. So in that moment, I was summoning what my advisor had told me about stepping in and not stepping in. And I thought, okay, it's really tempting to want to sit these two people down and be like, I'm not gonna fire either one of you, and you need to resolve the situation. But I decided that in my gut, this was just a minor squabble. I mean, it seemed like it was major since they both wanted me to fire each other, but I knew them. I knew they were the best of buds. They'd been working together pretty harmoniously for at least as long as I knew, about 6 months. So instead of stepping in and telling them what to do, I just acted again as guardrails, and I told them that they would have 1 week. I decided, and I would give them a chance to kind of spend the first couple days just like cooling down, collecting their thoughts. And then I suggested that they have a meeting, talk to one another uninterrupted, hear the other person's side of the story. And at the end of the week, if they just couldn't resolve their situation, then they could come to me, and I'd be happy to step in. So, a week went by. We didn't have any major customer issues, thankfully. And at the end of the week, I know it's going to seem like a fairy tale ending, but Sam and Dakota sorted things out. I was actually shocked at their response, which was that they thanked me for letting them sort things out. They were like, oh, I'm so glad you didn't play like parents and tell us what to do. We got a chance to not only see what we were doing wrong, but come up with a better paradigm for communicating with one another and figuring out how we should proceed when one person thinks that their solution is better than the other. I decided to take things one step further and kind of expose what had happened with Sam and Dakota and explain to the team that conflict is just normal. It's gonna happen a lot. It's gonna happen in stressful situations. It's gonna happen in peacetime as well. We need to embrace it. We also need to kind of have levels where, I want you all to sort of resolve things on your own, and then if that doesn't help, you can certainly come and talk to me. But I didn't want to be that first line of defense, because then all I would be doing every day was being in conference rooms and hearing people, explain that they needed to fire people. So this was really helpful in terms of laying out sort of the people issues, and I was happy to report that 2 years in, it took me about 2 years, I started to see that all of my goals related to product and process and people were paying off. And as I talked to my advisor, I was really helpful and I was really thankful that I had some outside perspective, especially someone who was a bit more objective. They weren't inside of my company, so they could come in and they could shadow me and they could see how I was reacting to things. And I had learned how to lead by influence instead of by authority. Now, as you are all thinking about being a first-time leader and how you're going to scale yourself, I know it's going to seem like a lot. It's just like so much to bite off, and you're thinking like, wow, if I had those 3 goals, I don't know what I would do. So one really simple thing to start with is just take stock of your to-do list. Like, what do you see that you're doing on a day-to-day basis that maybe you don't need to be doing, and somebody else on your team could do? And if they're not ready to do it, like if they're not ready to take over your code, what do you need to do to get them there? Do you need to maybe pair program or mob program or help them out and kind of coach them over time? And then what are the things that you need to focus your attention on and do more of? And if you don't know how to do it, how can you get outside help as well? So in taking stock, I realized that some of my skills were getting rusty, definitely my coding skills, and I didn't have that sense of accomplishment on a day-to-day basis, that kind of instant gratification that I had craved in the past. But over time, I was learning new skills, and I was starting to feel a lot more accomplished over time. So if nothing else, I hope that from this talk, you'll at least leave with this mantra of trying to figure out when it's appropriate to step into situations and you need to be there for your team or for others, and when you want to trust your gut and say that you're not going to step in because you need to scale yourself as a leader. If you'd like to stay in touch, you can contact me on Twitter and check out my website. Thank you.